Tom Steyer claims that he can, quote, beat Trump on the economy. What does that even mean? The economy is doing really well right now. Let's go into it and see what he's trying to say. Before we get into that, let's look at who Tom Steyer is. So Tom Steyer is a billionaire who I first heard about when he invested tens of millions of his own dollars into a campaign to try and impeach President Trump. Now, maybe you think this happened after the Ukraine investigation, or maybe after the Mueller report, but no, this happened all the way back in 2017, before any of that had come to light at all. So even if you think those are impeachable offenses, nothing like that had happened as of yet. So why did he want to impeach President Trump all the way back in 2017? Basically before he had done almost anything. These are some of the reasons that he gave for, quote, actively sabotaging Obamacare. To me, that sounds like trying to repeal Obamacare, which is a difference in policy, not an impeachable offense. And he also said, quote, every day, Americans are left bracing for a Twitter screed that could set off a nuclear war. So the reasons for impeachment all the way back in 2017 were, one, because he was trying to repeal Obamacare, and two, he tweets a lot. Both those things, I guess, are technically accurate, but they're not impeachable. And I feel like this is important because it goes into the mindset of not just Tom Steyer, but many of the Democrats. They were calling for Trump's impeachment literally since the day he got into office. And that speaks volumes about them and about Tom Steyer as well. Also, in every advertisement I've seen Tom Steyer in, he always has this belt. Every single one. And trust me, living in Iowa, I have seen plenty. So now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. He always wears that belt. Speaking of living in Iowa, since the Iowa Caucus is coming up in just a few weeks, basically my day is filled with advertisements from political campaigns like Tom Steyer's. And I've seen his ads plenty of times. The reason I'm talking about him is because he has one ad in particular where he claims he can beat Trump on the economy. And it's not just him, but the people that he probably paid to be in that ad are also saying the same thing. Here's a small clip.
Beat him on the economy.
Beat him on the economy.
We have to beat him on the economy.
That's why I'm for Tom Steyer.
I'm Tom Steyer, and I approve this message.
I didn't want to show the full thing because I'm afraid it might get me a copyright strike. But I think you get the gist of it. He thinks he can beat Trump on the basis of the economy. Well, what does that mean? The economy's doing pretty well, isn't it? Let's find out. After seeing that ad for probably the millionth time, I decided to look up Tom Steyer and specifically go to his economic policies, because in here I figured he would talk about the horrible things that Trump is doing for the economy. And he does, kind of. He has this paragraph in there which says, quote, Donald Trump's erratic behavior, short-sighted tax cuts, and winner-take-all vision for America has thrown our markets into chaos, ballooned our national debt, perpetuated wage stagnation, made it hard to unionize, and caused sharp declines in corporate investment amid fears of a looming recession. The first thing you should notice when you're looking at something like this is the blue words are hyperlinks, so you can look at them and see what the heck he's talking about. Here are two that I looked at that were very disappointing and doesn't really bode well for the rest of the claims he's making. First, he claimed that Trump has, quote, thrown our markets into chaos. What does that mean? The link that he gave is from The Guardian, and thankfully they point out it's been over a year since this article came out. But not only that, it was in the middle of the government shutdown. He's taking an article in the middle of the government shutdown when obviously there was chaos and uncertainty and saying that Trump has thrown our economy into chaos generally. That is an extraordinarily dishonest point. You cannot do that. You cannot take the worst of one situation and say it applies to all situations, because that doesn't happen. The economy is actually not in chaos. It's doing really well. And I'm going to argue that throughout the rest of this video. Let's look at another hyperlink that he provided. When he said Trump was perpetuating wage stagnation, he shared this article, which, once again, is over a year old. If you're talking about the economy, trying to beat Trump on the economy, you need to be up to date on the economy. If you're a year behind, you're not going to win. So now let's talk about his, quote, short-sighted tax cuts. The problem that most people have with them is they believe it all went to the rich, that they didn't get tax cuts. The New York Times has this article where it shows that 65% of Americans got tax cuts, even though only 40% of them thought they did. So the Democrats have done a great job at making you think the tax cut did not apply to you, that it only applied to rich people. And that's not true. Yes, rich people got tax cuts. Most individuals got tax cuts. I've seen other articles where it went as high as 80% of Americans. The fact of the matter is, the standard deduction for every American doubled from $6,000 to $12,000 automatically. Or if you're filing jointly, it doubled from $12,000 to $24,000. What that means is automatically, if you're married, your taxable income decreased by $24,000 as opposed to the previous decrease of $12,000. That is a huge difference for people who are poor. There's no way you can deny that. One thing I will actually agree with Steyer on, and that is that he has ballooned the national debt. The debt has continued to increase dramatically since Trump entered in office. Now, that's not just on him. Presidents have spent way more than they should. It seems to be a recurring thing regardless of who's president. But that is still a valid complaint to have, that we're spending too much. This most recent federal budget for 2020 has $4.7 trillion. We don't have that much to spend, and that's something that I really wish the Trump administration would address, but as of yet, they haven't. It's one of my biggest pet peeves with Republicans, where they claim they're going to cut spending, and then they don't. He's also, I guess, trying to claim that Trump is responsible for the fear of a looming recession, and that is simply not accurate. Yes, there is some fear that a recession may be coming in the near future, but that's not just because of Trump. You see, a recession occurs generally every 8 to 9 years. That's on average. And the last recession we had ended all the way back in June of 2009. That's more than 10 years, and there has not been a recession as of yet. That means we're due for a recession. It sucks, and it's not entirely related to the policy that's being enacted, but there's going to be a recession at some point in the near future. It may not be right now, it may not be when Trump is president, but it will certainly happen over the next few years, if history is any indication. And I think it is. What that means is that even if a recession does happen while Trump is in office, it's not necessarily a result of his policies. It's a thing that happens on a frequent basis. Now let's look at the numbers to kind of give us an idea of how the economy is actually doing. Since we've discounted some of the things Steyer has said, let's look at the rest. Jobs are up, unemployment is down, job openings are up, earnings are up, economic growth is up, S&P is up, and the median household income is up. The poverty rate is down. The economy is doing fairly well. But let's look at the specific claim that Trump is, quote, perpetuating wage stagnation. We can see here clearly that wages are not stagnating. Stagnating wage would be 0% increase, but here we have 2.8% increase. Let's look a little bit more at that. In the first 32 months of the Trump presidency, wages have increased by 2.8%. That is total average wages. If you look just at rank and file production and non-supervisory workers, that goes up to 3.2%. Most Americans fall into that category. 82% of them, as a matter of fact, fall into that category. So for most Americans, there's been a wage increase of about 3.2%. That does not look like wage stagnation to me. That looks like a good thing. What's even more appealing about the economy is that, believe it or not, we're in the midst of a 50-year low when it comes to the unemployment. The unemployment rate has not been this low in 50 years. That's the average unemployment rate. For minorities, it's even more of a record than that. When you look at the unemployment rate, it is doing phenomenally well. This economy is going great for people who are trying to get jobs and are getting them. There are plenty of job openings and there are plenty of people working jobs who previously were not. So what does AOC think about these unemployment numbers?
Unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Unemployment is low because people are working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and can barely feed their kids.
Why'd I even ask? Of course she doesn't know what she's talking about, as per usual. Let me address this in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, the unemployment numbers don't come from the number of jobs that are filled, they come from the number of individuals who are working. Put simply, if I have one job and then I get a second job, that will not in any way affect the unemployment numbers because either way, I was employed. So me taking a second job will not affect the unemployment rate. So AOC trying to say that people are employed because they're working 2 or 3 jobs, that's not how it works. How many people are working 2 or 3 jobs? Maybe that's an issue. That's not even accurate. If you look at the total rate of Americans who are working multiple jobs, it's actually one of the lowest it's been in at least a decade. So not only does AOC not know what she's talking about when it comes to the unemployment numbers, but her trying to claim that people are working 2 or 3 jobs at rates higher than normal is wrong. We already said this earlier, but I think it's important to point out that the S&P is doing phenomenally well also. This is another record. It's not just a 50-year record though, it's an all-time record. On a frequent basis, the S&P is breaking its own record for the highest it's ever been. And the S&P 500 index is a good status on how the rest of the stock market is doing. When the S&P is doing well, the rest of the stocks are generally doing well also. So as we can see, the stock market is also doing incredibly well. Now the response to this is generally, well, the working class and poor people don't have any money in stocks, so that's not affecting them at all. And let's see if that's true. It is accurate that only 52% of Americans have any money in the stock market, according to a Gallup poll. And that is something that is actually a little bit lower than I thought it would be. One reason it may be low is because that doesn't necessarily include pensions. You see, some people have part of their pension in the stock market through their employers, and they don't even know. So if that is the case, this number could be a little bit higher. Regardless, it's still pretty low. But the reasoning is not because they necessarily can't afford it, it's because they haven't done it. And part of the reason for that is because of the fear that they may lose out. You see, back in the 2008-2009 recession, people lost a lot of money in the stock market. And when that happens, they tend to lose trust in the stock market. So some of them have chosen to not invest in that again, which is their right. They can do it if they want. But let's stop claiming that middle-class workers cannot invest in the stock market. It's easier than it's ever been. I, as a poor graduate student making barely more than minimum wage, am able to have some money in the stock market. All you have to do is find an app on your smartphone, download it, and invest like $10 a month or whatever you want to do. It's really easy. If you want to do it, you can do it. So let's stop bringing this up as if the stock market is only going to benefit rich people because they're the only ones in it. First off, it's not accurate, and anyone who wants to be can be a part of it. Going back to the issue of the budget, Steyer has another complaint about Trump. He says, Trump and his Republican allies in Congress passed a massive tax giveaway for the wealthy and corporations. We've already disproven that. It's not accurate. Now, he proposed budget cuts to Medicaid and Medicare benefits, affordable housing programs, and higher education funding to pay for it all. I already talked about how I think there does need to be budget cuts, not just in these areas, but pretty much everywhere across the board. We need to have cuts because we're spending way more than we're taking in. And that's not acceptable. Since we do have to cut the budget, it stands to reason that we're going to have to cut, at least to an extent, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of these entitlement programs. And that's because if you look at our budget, 60% of our federal budget goes to these programs. It's only logical to say that if you're trying to cut the budget, you have to delve into the part where 60% of your money goes. It would be ridiculous to try and cut the federal budget and ignore 60% of the money. The problem is, if you try and address that, people like Tom Steyer and yes, AOC come out of the woodworks with nonsense and claims that are factually inaccurate. For example, the Trump administration did pass a change with EBT or food stamps. They changed the eligibility requirements, and this is how AOC responded. My family relied on food stamps when my dad died at 48. I was a student. If this happened then, we might have just starved. Now, many people will. So she's saying that it's likely her family would have starved if Trump were president. But not only that, a lot of people are now going to starve because of this new policy. She's not insinuating or implying it, she's straight up saying it. Many people will starve. So what's the truth here? The first thing you need to realize is these changes, one, do not affect anyone with dependents. What that means is that families are safe, that their reliance on food stamps or EBT will not be changed or taken away. So her family would have been fine because they were a family with dependents. Second off, it only applies to people who are able-bodied workers who are not working at least 80 hours in a month. So what this means is that someone who does not have a family and is not working will not be able to receive food stamps for more than 3 months over a 3-year period. And to me, that sounds reasonable. If you're not working because you just lost your job, you have 3 months of getting food stamps before you can find a new job. That seems reasonable to me. But if you're choosing to not work because you don't want to work, you have no dependents, why should the government and us, the taxpayers, be footing your bill? That does not make sense to me. But if you're AOC, all you have to do is claim people are going to die because they'll starve, and then everyone hates the Trump administration. In conclusion here, Tom Steyer is making all sorts of claims about the Trump economy, and he hasn't really backed any of them up. A lot of the sources he uses are old, outdated, and simply inaccurate. The economy right now under Trump is doing phenomenally well, by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, all you have to do is look at the record low unemployment and the stock market and the increased wages and all of these things to recognize the economy is doing really well. So I really don't understand why he is focusing on the economy, what Tom Steyer thinks he can beat Trump on the economy. I don't care how successful of a businessman he is, the economy is going fantastically well. Why does he want to come in, make all these drastic changes that will inevitably change the growth of the economy? I don't understand it. The only thing I can come up with is he really hates Trump, and that is true. So let me know what you think about all this down below, and maybe what you think about Tom Steyer. I know you probably don't know much about him. He's really only just bought his way into the Democratic candidacy, but it's been fun to watch people call him out on it. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a like and a dislike if you want. I don't care. Check out some of these other videos you may have missed before you take off. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.